The rifle cracked against her shoulder for the 100th time that morning. Another precise adjustment to the scope that seemed to never satisfy her standards. Chen squinted through the optics, her fingers dancing across the turrets with the delicate touch of someone calibrating a scientific instrument rather than a weapon. The other hunters at Blackwood Ridge Shooting Complex rolled their eyes as she fired another careful shot into the distant target. "Still playing with your toy gun, sweetheart?" Marcus Rodriguez called out from the adjacent firing lane, his voice carrying the casual cruelty that had become his trademark over the past 3 months. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." His custom hunting rifle gleamed with expensive modifications that cost more than most people's monthly salary, a stark contrast to Emma's modest bolt-action rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a modern shooting facility. Emma's response was silence, the same measured quiet that had greeted every taunt, every dismissive comment, every attempt to make her feel unwelcome at what was supposed to be a place where skill mattered more than politics. She simply adjusted her scope another quarter turn and settled back into her shooting position, her breathing controlled and methodical as she prepared for another shot. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Rocky Mountain shooting range, illuminating a scene that had played out countless times over the past year. Emma arrived each day at dawn, long before the crowds and the noise, seeking something in the solitude that she couldn't find anywhere else in her carefully constructed civilian life. Her small sedan looked out of place among the massive pickup trucks and SUVs that would fill the parking lot later, just as she seemed to occupy a different world from the weekend warriors who treated marksmanship as a hobby rather than a discipline. Her routine never varied. Check in with Jerry Hawkins, the gruff rangemaster who had watched her progression from tentative beginner to something approaching competence. Set up at lane 12, the furthest position from the main entrance where conversations were less likely to intrude on her concentration. Unpack her gear with the methodical precision of someone for whom every movement served a purpose, even if that purpose wasn't immediately obvious to casual observers. The rifle itself told a story of contradiction that few people bothered to read. A standard Remington Model 700 that had seen better decades, its stock worn smooth by countless hands and its metal surfaces showing the honest patina of frequent use. The scope mounted above it was similarly modest, a basic Leupold that prioritized reliability over features, the kind of optic that serious shooters respected even if it didn't impress anyone looking for flash and glamour. What made Emma's setup unusual wasn't the equipment, but the way she used it. Her shots clustered with a consistency that suggested either extraordinary natural talent or extensive professional training. Yet she claimed to be nothing more than an insurance adjuster from Denver who had taken up target shooting as stress relief after her divorce. The contradiction might have raised questions among more observant shooters, but the Blackwood Ridge community had learned to focus more on gossip than genuine marksmanship. Jerry Hawkins had noticed, though. 27 years of running shooting ranges had taught him to recognize different types of shooters, and Chen didn't fit into any of the usual categories. Weekend enthusiasts approached their rifles with enthusiasm but inconsistent technique. Competitive shooters displayed their skills with the showmanship that came from seeking recognition and prizes. Military veterans carried themselves with a particular bearing that announced their background to anyone trained to recognize it. Emma possessed none of these characteristics, yet demonstrated capabilities that surpassed most shooters in each category. Her movements around firearms displayed familiarity that went beyond recreational training, but she showed none of the swagger that usually accompanied such expertise. She maintained her equipment with obsessive attention to detail, yet claimed to have learned everything from YouTube videos and online forums. The mystery deepened when Jerry observed her shooting routine through binoculars from the range office. Her positions were textbook perfect, not just for target shooting but for applications that had nothing to do with paper targets and everything to do with situations where missing wasn't an option. The way she managed her breathing, controlled her trigger pull, and adjusted for environmental factors suggested training that went far beyond civilian instruction. Most telling was what she didn't do. She never bragged about her groups, never sought attention for her achievements, never joined the informal competitions that erupted spontaneously among regular customers. When other shooters approached her station to examine her targets, she would quietly pack up and move to a different lane, avoiding the conversations that might lead to questions she apparently preferred not to answer. Marcus Rodriguez represented everything Emma seemed determined to avoid. A successful real estate developer who had discovered shooting sports during midlife crisis and embraced them with the enthusiasm of someone who had never encountered a hobby he couldn't dominate through superior equipment and aggressive personality. His shooting bay resembled a small sporting goods store with multiple rifles, electronic hearing protection, ballistic computers, and enough ammunition to supply a small military unit. His approach to marksmanship emphasized technology over technique, relying on expensive gadgets to compensate for fundamentals he had never bothered to master properly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The rifle cracked against her shoulder for the 100th time that morning. Another precise adjustment to the scope that seemed to never satisfy her standards. Chen squinted through the optics, her fingers dancing across the turrets with the delicate touch of someone calibrating a scientific instrument rather than a weapon. The other hunters at Blackwood Ridge Shooting Complex rolled their eyes as she fired another careful shot into the distant target. "Still playing with your toy gun, sweetheart?" Marcus Rodriguez called out from the adjacent firing lane, his voice carrying the casual cruelty that had become his trademark over the past 3 months. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." His custom hunting rifle gleamed with expensive modifications that cost more than most people's monthly salary, a stark contrast to Emma's modest bolt-action rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a modern shooting facility. Emma's response was silence, the same measured quiet that had greeted every taunt, every dismissive comment, every attempt to make her feel unwelcome at what was supposed to be a place where skill mattered more than politics. She simply adjusted her scope another quarter turn and settled back into her shooting position, her breathing controlled and methodical as she prepared for another shot. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Rocky Mountain shooting range, illuminating a scene that had played out countless times over the past year. Emma arrived each day at dawn, long before the crowds and the noise, seeking something in the solitude that she couldn't find anywhere else in her carefully constructed civilian life. Her small sedan looked out of place among the massive pickup trucks and SUVs that would fill the parking lot later, just as she seemed to occupy a different world from the weekend warriors who treated marksmanship as a hobby rather than a discipline. Her routine never varied. Check in with Jerry Hawkins, the gruff rangemaster who had watched her progression from tentative beginner to something approaching competence. Set up at lane 12, the furthest position from the main entrance where conversations were less likely to intrude on her concentration. Unpack her gear with the methodical precision of someone for whom every movement served a purpose, even if that purpose wasn't immediately obvious to casual observers. The rifle itself told a story of contradiction that few people bothered to read. A standard Remington Model 700 that had seen better decades, its stock worn smooth by countless hands and its metal surfaces showing the honest patina of frequent use. The scope mounted above it was similarly modest, a basic Leupold that prioritized reliability over features, the kind of optic that serious shooters respected even if it didn't impress anyone looking for flash and glamour. What made Emma's setup Unusual wasn't the equipment, but the way she used it. Her shots clustered with a consistency that suggested either extraordinary natural talent or extensive professional training. Yet she claimed to be nothing more than an insurance adjuster from Denver who had taken up target shooting as stress relief after her divorce. The contradiction might have raised questions among more observant shooters, but the Blackwood Ridge community had learned to focus more on gossip than genuine marksmanship. Jerry Hawkins had noticed, though. 27 years of running shooting ranges had taught him to recognize different types of shooters, and Emma Chen didn't fit into any of the usual categories. Weekend enthusiasts approached their rifles with enthusiasm but inconsistent technique. Competitive shooters displayed their skills with the showmanship that came from seeking recognition and prizes. Military veterans carried themselves with a particular bearing that announced their background to anyone trained to recognize it. Emma possessed none of these characteristics, yet demonstrated capabilities that surpassed most shooters in each category. Her movements around firearms displayed familiarity that went beyond recreational training, but she showed none of the swagger that usually accompanied such expertise. She maintained her equipment with obsessive attention to detail, yet claimed to have learned everything from YouTube videos and online forums. The mystery deepened when Jerry observed her shooting routine through binoculars from the range office. Her positions were textbook perfect, not just for target shooting but for applications that had nothing to do with paper targets and everything to do with situations where missing wasn't an option. The way she managed her breathing, controlled her trigger pull, and adjusted for environmental factors suggested training that went far beyond civilian instruction. Most telling was what she didn't do. She never bragged about her groups, never sought attention for her achievements, never joined the informal competitions that erupted spontaneously among regular customers. When other shooters approached her station to examine her targets, she would quietly pack up and move to a different lane, avoiding the conversations that might lead to questions she apparently preferred not to answer. Marcus Rodriguez represented everything Emma seemed determined to avoid. A successful real estate developer who had discovered shooting sports during midlife crisis and embraced them with the enthusiasm of someone who had never encountered a hobby he couldn't dominate through superior equipment and aggressive personality. His shooting bay resembled a small sporting goods store with multiple rifles, electronic hearing protection, ballistic computers, and enough ammunition to supply a small military unit. His approach to marksmanship emphasized technology over technique, relying on expensive gadgets to compensate for fundamentals he had never bothered to master properly. Custom triggers, adjustable stocks, high-end optics, and premium ammunition were supposed to guarantee performance that his actual skills couldn't deliver consistently. When his equipment failed to produce the results his ego demanded, he inevitably found external factors to blame rather than examining his own shortcomings. Emma's presence at the range had become an irritant that grew more bothersome with each passing week. Her quiet competence with basic equipment highlighted the limitations of his expensive approach, while her apparent indifference to his achievements challenged his assumption that superior gear automatically conferred superior status. The fact that she was an Asian woman shooting better groups with a rifle worth 1/10 of his setup represented a direct challenge to worldview that depended on clear hierarchies and predictable outcomes. The harassment had started subtly, with comments about lane assignments and suggestions that beginners might be more comfortable at indoor ranges, where distances were shorter and conditions more forgiving. When Emma ignored these hints and continued her daily routine, the comments became more direct, questioning her understanding of firearm safety and wondering aloud whether someone with her background really belonged at a facility that catered to serious shooters. Other regular customers had initially dismissed Marcus's behavior as harmless ribbing, the kind of good-natured hazing that was common in predominantly male environments. But his comments had gradually shifted from playful to pointed, incorporating assumptions about her gender, ethnicity, and presumed lack of experience that made even casual observers uncomfortable. The range community's failure to address his escalating behavior had created an environment where Emma's continued presence required daily acts of courage that went unrecognized and unacknowledged. The morning routine that had once provided Emma with peace and focus had transformed into an endurance test, where marksmanship skills mattered less than psychological resilience. Each trip to the range now required mental preparation for encounters that could range from subtle slights to overt hostility, depending on Marcus's mood and the composition of the audience he was trying to impress. Emma's response to this treatment revealed character traits that seemed inconsistent with her claimed background as a recently divorced insurance professional seeking recreational outlet. Rather than confronting the harassment directly or seeking support from range management, she absorbed each incident with the stoic acceptance of someone accustomed to hostile environments. Her ability to maintain concentration and performance standards despite systematic attempts to disrupt her training suggested experience with pressure that went beyond civilian workplace challenges. The technical aspects of her shooting provided additional clues for anyone trained to interpret them. Her zero process wasn't the trial and error approach typical of recreational shooters, learning to match their point of aim with point of impact. Instead, she followed a systematic protocol that minimized ammunition expenditure while achieving precise calibration across multiple ranges and environmental conditions. Her data collection methods, recorded in a notebook using abbreviated terminology that would have been meaningless to most observers, followed military standards for maintaining accurate ballistic records. More revealing was her unconscious behavior during shooting sessions. She instinctively positioned herself to maintain situational awareness of other shooters and range activities, never becoming so focused on her targets that she lost track of her surroundings. Her equipment was arranged for rapid deployment rather than convenience, with spare ammunition, tools, and accessories positioned according to priorities that suggested scenarios more complex than recreational target practice. When weather conditions changed, Emma's adjustments went beyond the basic windage and elevation corrections that competent civilian shooters would make. She compensated for factors like air density, humidity, and temperature variations using calculations that most hunters never learned and competitive shooters rarely mastered. Her ability to predict bullet behavior under varying conditions suggested extensive experience with precision shooting across different environments and circumstances. The contradiction between her claimed inexperience and demonstrated capabilities had created a puzzle that Jerry Hawkins found increasingly intriguing. His attempts to engage her in conversations about shooting technique were met with deflection and modesty that seemed calculated rather than genuine. When he mentioned advanced concepts to test her knowledge, she would claim ignorance while unconsciously nodding in ways that suggested familiarity with the topics. Other aspects of Emma's behavior at the range supported the theory that her background contained elements she preferred not to discuss. She arrived and departed using routes that avoided the main parking area, suggesting either extreme introversion or deliberate operational security measures. Her vehicle, while unremarkable in appearance, had been modified with features that most civilians wouldn't consider necessary, including tinted windows, upgraded locks, and electronics that went beyond standard factory equipment. Her clothing choices reflected similar contradictions. The casual civilian attire she wore to the range was high quality and well-fitted, but lacked the brand consciousness typical of professionals in her claimed income bracket. More significantly, her boots, gloves, and accessories showed wear patterns consistent with extensive outdoor activity in challenging conditions, not the occasional recreational use that would be expected from weekend target shooting. The physiological signs were equally telling for anyone trained to recognize them. Emma's reaction times, peripheral vision, and ability to process multiple information sources simultaneously suggested training that went far beyond civilian firearms instruction. When unexpected sounds occurred on the range, her responses were immediate and tactical, prioritizing threat assessment over social courtesy in ways that revealed deeply ingrained professional habits. Most civilians, when startled by sudden noises, would look around casually to identify the source before returning attention to their activities. Emma's responses followed a different pattern entirely, immediately assessing potential threats, while maintaining readiness to take protective action. Her body positioning during these moments revealed combat training that emphasized mobility and defensive options rather than the static positions preferred by recreational target shooters. The notebook she maintained during shooting sessions contained additional clues about her true background and current objectives. While the entries appeared to document routine practice sessions, the level of detail and analytical approach suggested purposes beyond recreational improvement. She recorded not just shot placement and accuracy measurements, but environmental conditions, equipment performance, and observational notes that would be valuable for operational planning rather than casual hobby development. Her ammunition choices provided another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit her claimed civilian status. While she used standard commercial loads appropriate for target shooting, her purchasing pattern suggested familiarity with ballistic performance characteristics that most recreational shooters never studied. She selected specific bullet weights and powder charges based on technical considerations that went beyond simple accuracy requirements, optimizing for factors that mattered more in practical applications than competition scenarios. The way Emma maintained her rifle revealed professional habits that contradicted her claimed amateur status. Her cleaning procedures followed military standards for preservation and reliability, rather than the basic maintenance that recreational shooters typically performed. She inspected components for wear patterns and stress indicators that most civilians wouldn't recognize, replacing parts according to schedules, based on round counts and performance degradation rather than obvious failures. Her interaction with other firearms at the range provided additional evidence of extensive training that she preferred not to acknowledge. When other shooters experienced equipment malfunctions, Emma would unconsciously move to assist before catching herself and withdrawing to avoid unwanted attention. Her diagnostic abilities and repair knowledge suggested hands-on experience with multiple weapon systems under operational conditions where failure could have life-threatening consequences. The psychological profile that emerged from observing Emma's behavior patterns indicated someone dealing with significant internal conflicts about identity and purpose. Her dedication to maintaining and improving marksmanship skills suggested ongoing preparation for applications that her civilian life wouldn't require. Yet she seemed determined to maintain the fiction that shooting was merely a recreational outlet for managing post-divorce stress. Her tolerance for Marcus Rodriguez's harassment revealed coping mechanisms developed for dealing with hostile environments where direct confrontation would be counterproductive or dangerous. Rather than responding emotionally to his provocations, she processed each incident with analytical detachment, cataloging behaviors and assessing threat levels with the objectivity of someone trained to operate in unpredictable and potentially hostile circumstances. The careful boundaries Emma maintained around personal information and background details suggested either natural introversion, taken to unusual extremes, or operational security practices designed to prevent inquiry into aspects of her life that required protection. Her responses to direct questions were polite but uninformative, providing just enough detail to maintain social courtesy without revealing anything substantial about her history, motivations, or future plans. Jerry Hawkins had begun to suspect that Emma Chen represented something more complex and potentially significant than the divorced insurance adjuster seeking recreational therapy that she claimed to be. His experience with military veterans and law enforcement personnel had taught him to recognize the signs of professional training that civilian shooters rarely acquired. and Emma displayed too many of these indicators to dismiss as coincidental. The question that occupied Jerry's thoughts during quiet moments at the range was not whether Emma possessed advanced training and experience, but why she felt compelled to conceal these qualifications while continuing to develop skills that suggested ongoing preparation for scenarios that civilian life shouldn't require. Her presence at Blackwood Ridge represented either an unusual personal journey or something more complex that involved considerations beyond recreational marksmanship. Marcus Rodriguez's escalating harassment had created a situation that threatened to disrupt the careful balance Emma had established between maintaining her cover story and continuing the training regimen that seemed essential to her psychological well-being. His determination to expose what he perceived as fraudulent claims about her experience was approaching a confrontation that might force revelations she was clearly unprepared to share. The tension building around Emma's daily presence at the range reflected broader conflicts between appearance and reality, assumption and truth, civilian expectations and professional requirements that existed in communities where different worlds intersected without acknowledgement or understanding. Her ability to navigate these contradictions while maintaining both her marksmanship standards and psychological equilibrium suggested resources and capabilities that went far beyond the ordinary challenges of post-divorce adjustment. The morning sun continued its arc across the Rocky Mountain sky as Emma fired another carefully measured shot into the distant target, her concentration undisturbed by the growing murmur of conversation from other shooting positions. Whatever secrets she carried, whatever training she had received, whatever purposes drove her daily pilgrimage to Lane 12, remained locked behind the careful facade of civilian normalcy that she maintained with discipline that spoke to professional rather than personal motivations. The question that would soon demand an answer was not whether Emma Chen possessed the skills and experience that her modest demeanor concealed, but whether the circumstances building around her at Blackwood Ridge Shooting Complex would force their revelation in ways that served justice or merely satisfied curiosity. The difference between those outcomes might determine not just her future, but the safety of everyone who shared the range on what promised to be a day unlike any other in the facility's 23-year history. The third week of October brought unseasonable warmth to the Colorado mountains, creating mirage effects that danced across the longer range targets and challenged even experienced shooters to maintain accuracy. Emma arrived at her usual time, but today carried additional equipment that suggested more complex training objectives than her typical zeroing routine. A spotting scope, wind flags, and what appeared to be a chronograph joined her standard kit, transforming her minimalist setup into something approaching a professional ballistics laboratory. Marcus Rodriguez noticed the expanded equipment array immediately, his territorial instincts triggered by any change in the dynamics that he worked so hard to control. The additional gear represented an escalation in Emma's apparent seriousness about shooting sports, contradicting his narrative about her amateur status and threatening his position as the range's de facto technical authority. His response was swift and predictably aggressive, designed to reassert dominance before other shooters could draw their own conclusions about Emma's evolving capabilities. "Planning to write a book about shooting, Princess," Marcus called out, as Emma methodically arranged her equipment according to a pattern that maximized efficiency while maintaining clear sight lines to multiple target distances. His voice carried the casual contempt that had become his signature approach to interactions with her, but today carried an additional edge of concern that suggested genuine worry about challenges to his established position within the range. Hierarchy. Emma's response maintained the same measured silence that had characterized her reactions to previous provocations, but subtle changes in her body language indicated growing fatigue with the constant harassment. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as she continued setting up her equipment, while her movements acquired a precision that suggested suppressed anger rather than casual indifference. The transformation was minor enough to escape casual notice, but significant enough to indicate that her seemingly infinite patience might have boundaries that Marcus was approaching. The morning's first shots revealed changes in Emma's shooting routine that supported Marcus's suspicion about escalating seriousness. Instead of firing at single targets to verify zero, she began engaging multiple target distances in rapid succession, demonstrating familiarity with complex ballistic calculations that allowed her to transition between ranges without the extended adjustment periods that most shooters required. Her shooting positions varied from shot to shot, incorporating standing, kneeling, and prone configurations with smooth transitions that suggested extensive practice in tactical applications. Jerry Hawkins observed these developments from the range office with growing certainty that Chen represented something far more significant than the recreational shooter she claimed to be. Her current training routine resembled advanced military or law enforcement exercises designed to develop proficiency under varied conditions and time constraints. The complexity of her ballistic calculations, executed without electronic aids or extended preparation time, indicated mathematical knowledge that went far beyond civilian sporting applications. More concerning from Jerry's perspective was the way other range customers began reacting to Emma's demonstration of previously hidden capabilities. The whispered conversations that followed her shooting sessions now carried tones of speculation and suspicion rather than casual gossip, creating an atmosphere of tension that threatened the relaxed camaraderie that Jerry worked hard to maintain among his regular customers. The range was becoming a stage for conflicts that had nothing to do with marksmanship and everything to do with assumptions about identity, capability, and belonging. The situation deteriorated further when Emma began incorporating movement into her shooting exercises, firing from positions that required her to advance between shots, while maintaining accuracy standards that would challenge stationary shooters. Her ability to engage targets while transitioning between covered positions demonstrated training that had no applications in recreational shooting sports, raising questions about her background that she continued to deflect with increasingly strained explanations about online training videos and self-directed learning. Marcus's reaction to these displays escalated from verbal harassment to active interference with Emma's training routine. He began timing his own shooting sessions to create noise and distraction during her most challenging exercises, using his expensive semi-automatic rifles to generate rapid-fire sequences that disrupted her concentration and forced her to pause between shots. When direct interference proved insufficient to break her focus, he enlisted other shooters in conversations designed to create audience pressure that might force her to abandon her more advanced training exercises. The psychological warfare that emerged around Emma's daily presence at Blackwood Ridge reflected deeper conflicts about gender roles, ethnic identity, and class assumptions that existed within the shooting sports community. Marcus's harassment drew support from customers who shared his discomfort with changes that challenged traditional hierarchies, while creating division among range users who recognized that his behavior violated basic standards of courtesy and sportsmanship. Jerry found himself managing conflicts that went far beyond typical range management issues, dealing with social dynamics that threatened to destroy the inclusive environment he had spent years developing. Emma's response to escalating harassment revealed character traits that seemed inconsistent with civilian background and training. Rather than seeking support from range management or other customers, she adapted her routine to minimize contact with hostile individuals while maintaining her training objectives. Her tactical approach to dealing with the situation included arriving earlier to avoid crowds, selecting shooting positions that provided maximum situational awareness, and modifying her exercises to reduce opportunities for interference without abandoning her apparent preparation goals. The notebook Emma maintained during shooting sessions evolved to include detailed observations about other range users, documenting behavior patterns and potential threat indicators with analytical precision that suggested professional training. In Human Intelligence Collection, her entries recorded not just marksmanship data, but comprehensive situational assessments that would be valuable for understanding the operational environment and planning appropriate responses to developing threats. The level of detail and analytical framework indicated experience with scenarios where such information could mean the difference between success and failure of mission objectives. More revealing were the changes in Emma's equipment selection and shooting routine that indicated preparation for scenarios beyond recreational target practice. She began carrying additional magazines and practicing reload procedures that prioritized speed over precision, skills that had no applications in sporting contexts but would be essential in tactical situations. Her shooting positions increasingly emphasized cover utilization and fields of fire rather than optimal accuracy, suggesting training objectives that involved potential hostile contact rather than competitive performance. The transformation in Emma's apparent priorities created additional tension with Marcus Rodriguez, who interpreted her advanced demonstrations as deliberate challenges to his authority and expertise. His response included attempts to discredit her achievements through claims about equipment advantages, environmental conditions, and luck rather than skill. Explanations that became increasingly desperate as her consistency disproved his theories about beginners' luck and favorable circumstances. His need to maintain superiority in shooting sports, combined with his inability to match her performance with superior equipment, created psychological pressure that manifested in increasingly aggressive behavior toward both Emma and other range users who expressed admiration for her capabilities. The social dynamics surrounding Emma's shooting routine began affecting other customers who found themselves forced to choose sides in conflicts they hadn't created and didn't fully understand. Long-term friendships within the range community fractured along lines that reflected broader social divisions about gender equality, ethnic acceptance, and meritocracy versus traditional privilege. Jerry Hawkins watched his carefully cultivated community atmosphere dissolve into factions that threatened the business relationships he depended on for the range's financial survival. Emma's apparent obliviousness to the social chaos surrounding her presence suggested either remarkable focus on personal objectives or professional training that prioritized mission accomplishment over social harmony. Her ability to maintain performance standards, despite systematic harassment and community division, indicated psychological resilience that went beyond normal civilian coping mechanisms, reinforcing suspicions about her true background and current objectives at the range. The technical aspects of Emma's shooting routine provided additional clues about specialized training that she continued to conceal behind claims of amateur status and recreational interest. Her familiarity with ballistic principles extended beyond basic accuracy requirements to include understanding of terminal effects, penetration characteristics, and application-specific ammunition selection that would be relevant for law enforcement or military operations rather than sporting competitions. Her knowledge of these subjects emerged through unconscious comments and equipment choices rather than direct demonstration, suggesting attempts to maintain operational security while continuing necessary training. More significant was Emma's apparent preparation for scenarios involving multiple targets, complex range estimation, and time-constrained engagements that had no civilian applications. Her practice routines included exercises designed to develop proficiency in target prioritization, threat assessment, and rapid engagement techniques that would be essential for personal protection or tactical operations. The sophistication of these training objectives, combined with her obvious experience in executing them effectively, indicated professional background that extended far beyond recreational shooting instruction. The question of Emma's true identity and objectives became more pressing as her behavior patterns revealed preparation for scenarios that civilian life shouldn't require. Her dedication to maintaining and improving tactical shooting skills suggested ongoing operational requirements, or anticipated threats that her insurance adjuster cover story couldn't explain. Jerry Hawkins found himself wondering whether Emma represented law enforcement conducting surveillance, military personnel maintaining readiness, or something more complex that involved considerations beyond local range management concerns. Situation reached a critical point when Marcus Rodriguez's harassment campaign expanded to include other female shooters, using Emma's presence as justification for broader attacks on women's participation in shooting sports. His claims that female shooters were inherently less capable and potentially dangerous to male participants created an atmosphere of hostility that threatened to drive away customers and expose the range to legal liability for tolerating discriminatory behavior. Jerry faced the choice between confronting Marcus directly or risking the loss of female customers who represented a growing portion of his business. Emma's response to the expanding harassment campaign revealed strategic thinking that suggested professional training in conflict management and operational planning. Rather than escalating the confrontation through direct challenges to Marcus's behavior, she began documenting incidents with photographic evidence and detailed written records that would support formal complaints if legal action became necessary. Her approach demonstrated understanding of evidence collection and legal procedures that went beyond typical civilian knowledge, reinforcing questions about her professional background and current objectives. The psychological profile that emerged from observing Emma's behavior during this period indicated someone with extensive experience managing hostile environments while maintaining operational objectives. Her ability to compartmentalize emotional responses to harassment while continuing complex training exercises suggested professional discipline that came from situations where personal feelings had to be subordinated to mission requirements. The level of mental resilience she displayed indicated either extraordinary natural temperament or training designed to develop such capabilities under extreme stress. Marcus Rodriguez's escalating behavior began attracting attention from other shooters who recognized that his harassment campaign had moved beyond acceptable boundaries into territory that threatened the range's reputation and their own enjoyment of shooting sports. Veterans among the customer base expressed particular concern about behavior that violated military standards of conduct and respect for fellow service members, creating pressure on Jerry Hawkins to address the situation before it escalated further or attracted external attention from law enforcement or media coverage. The breaking point approached when Marcus's harassment expanded to include physical intimidation tactics designed to create fear and force Emma's withdrawal from the range. His deliberate invasion of her personal space, combined with implied threats about what might happen to women who didn't know their place, crossed legal boundaries that transformed his behavior from obnoxious harassment into criminal conduct. Emma's measured response to these escalations demonstrated remarkable self-control, but also revealed defensive capabilities that suggested training in personal protection and close-quarters combat. The complexity of Emma's situation became apparent to Jerry Hawkins during a private conversation, where he attempted to address the harassment she was experiencing and offer support in dealing with Marcus Rodriguez's increasingly aggressive behavior. Her responses to his questions revealed sophisticated understanding of legal procedures, evidence requirements, and institutional dynamics that indicated professional experience with similar situations. More significantly, her reluctance to pursue formal complaints suggested concerns about scrutiny that extended beyond normal privacy preferences. Emma's training routine during this period evolved to include exercises that seemed designed to prepare for specific threat scenarios rather than general marksmanship improvement. Her practice sessions incorporated stress-inducing elements that simulated decision-making under pressure, target identification in complex environments, and shooting techniques optimized for personal defense rather than sporting accuracy. Level of realism in her training exercises suggested either paranoid preparation for unlikely events or professional requirements that her civilian cover story couldn't acknowledge. The equipment modifications Emma made to her rifle system provided additional evidence of preparation for applications beyond recreational shooting. Her installation of low-profile accessories, designed for rapid deployment and reliability under adverse conditions, indicated planning for scenarios where equipment failure could have serious consequences. Her selection of backup equipment and redundant systems suggested operational experience, where such preparations had proven necessary for mission success or personal survival. The ammunition Emma used for her training exercises revealed another layer of her apparent deception about recreational shooting interests. While she continued to use standard target loads for basic accuracy work, her advanced exercises incorporated premium defensive ammunition designed for optimal terminal performance rather than competitive accuracy. Her familiarity with different bullet designs and their respective applications indicated knowledge that went far beyond recreational shooting education, suggesting professional training or operational experience with weapons employment in tactical contexts. The social isolation that resulted from Marcus Rodriguez's harassment campaign had the unintended consequence of providing Emma with increased privacy for training exercises that revealed her true capabilities. Without the scrutiny of curious spectators, she began incorporating advanced techniques that demonstrated professional-level expertise in precision shooting, rapid engagement, and tactical movement. Her proficiency in these areas left no doubt that her claimed amateur status was a carefully constructed fiction designed to conceal extensive training and experience. Jerry Hawkins reached the conclusion that Emma Chen represented either law enforcement conducting undercover operations or military personnel maintaining readiness for classified assignments. Her behavior patterns, equipment choices, and demonstrated capabilities indicated professional background that extended far beyond civilian shooting instruction, while her obvious concerns about maintaining operational security suggested active duty status or ongoing obligations that required discretion about her true identity and objectives. The question that occupied Jerry's thoughts as the situation continued to deteriorate was whether Emma's presence at Blackwood Ridge represented routine training, maintenance, or preparation for specific operations that might involve local considerations. Her detailed observation and documentation of range activities, combined with her apparent interest in customer behavior patterns and facility security measures, suggested intelligence collection objectives that went beyond personal marksmanship. Development. The morning shooting session concluded with Emma's demonstration of capabilities that eliminated any remaining doubt about her professional background and advanced training. Her ability to engage multiple targets at extended ranges while maintaining accuracy standards that would challenge police, marksmen, or military snipers revealed expertise that could only be acquired through extensive professional instruction and operational experience. The question was no longer whether Emma possessed advanced capabilities, but what mission or objective required her to maintain and develop such skills while concealing her true identity and qualifications. Marcus Rodriguez's reaction to this demonstration of undeniable expertise marked a turning point in his harassment campaign, as he realized that his assumptions about Emma's amateur status had been completely wrong. The woman he had spent months trying to intimidate and humiliate possessed shooting skills that exceeded his own despite his expensive equipment and vocal claims of superiority. His response to this revelation would determine whether the situation moved toward resolution or escalated into something more dangerous for everyone involved at Blackwood Ridge Shooting Complex. The Thursday morning that changed everything at Blackwood Ridge began with an unusual phone call to Jerry Hawkins at 5:30 in the morning. Special Agent Lisa Torres from the FBI's Denver field office spoke with the crisp professionalism of someone delivering routine operational updates. But her words carried implications that transformed Jerry's understanding of recent events at his shooting facility. "We need to discuss one of your regular customers, Emma Chen," Torres said without preamble. "We have reason to believe she may be in immediate danger, and we need your cooperation to ensure the safety of everyone at your facility today." Jerry's confusion was immediate and profound. The quiet insurance adjuster who had become the center of so much controversy was apparently connected to federal law enforcement operations in ways that explained both her mysterious capabilities and her desperate need for operational security. Torres's reluctance to provide detailed explanations frustrated Jerry, but her urgency convinced him that the situation involved considerations far beyond typical range management concerns. "Emma is not who she appears to be," Torres continued, her voice carrying the weight of classified information that she couldn't fully share. "She's been maintaining a deep cover identity while gathering intelligence on suspected domestic terrorism activities. We have credible intelligence that her cover may have been compromised, and we need to coordinate protective measures immediately." The revelation struck Jerry with devastating clarity as he realized that months of harassment and social conflict at his range had been orchestrated around someone whose real job involved infiltrating dangerous extremist networks. Emma's careful boundaries, advanced capabilities, and apparent preparation for hostile scenarios suddenly made perfect sense within the context of undercover operations that could involve life-threatening consequences if her true identity became known to the wrong people. Torres explained that Emma had been investigating suspected connections between local shooting sports communities and organized groups planning domestic terrorism attacks against government facilities. Her mission required maintaining authentic civilian cover while documenting activities, identifying key participants, and gathering evidence that could prevent attacks while building legal cases against conspiracy participants. The delicate nature of her work meant that any compromise of her identity could result in immediate danger, not just to Emma, but to other law enforcement personnel and potential civilian targets. "Marcus Rodriguez is not just a harassment problem," Torres revealed with grim satisfaction. "He's been under surveillance as a potential recruitment target for extremist organizations. His behavior toward Emma suggests that he may have received instructions to test her reactions and gather information about her background. We believe today may bring a confrontation that could expose our entire operation." Jerry's stomach dropped as he realized that his shooting range had become the stage for a confrontation between federal law enforcement and domestic terrorism suspects, with his regular customers caught in the middle of operations they knew nothing about. The morning's events would determine whether months of careful investigation produced arrests and prevented attacks, or whether operational security failures resulted in casualties among people who had simply come to practice marksmanship as a recreational activity. Torres's instructions were specific and non-negotiable. Jerry would maintain normal operations while remaining alert for unusual activities or behaviors among customers. Plainclothes federal agents would be positioned throughout the facility to provide backup if the situation escalated beyond Emma's ability to handle alone. Most importantly, Jerry was to avoid any actions that might alert suspects to the true nature of Emma's identity or the federal interest in their activities. The weight of this responsibility settled on Jerry's shoulders as he realized that his decisions during the coming hours could affect national security operations and the safety of law enforcement personnel whose lives depended on maintaining operational security. His role had transformed from range manager to crucial participant in federal operations that extended far beyond his facility and involved threats he was only beginning to understand. Emma arrived at her usual time, but today her equipment selection included items that Jerry now recognized as specialized law enforcement gear disguised as civilian shooting accessories. Her communications device, previously dismissed as an expensive radio for coordinating with other shooters, was actually encrypted federal equipment that allowed her to maintain contact with surveillance teams positioned around the facility. Her shooting routine would serve dual purposes: maintaining her cover while positioning her to respond to threats that intelligence suggested might materialize during the morning session. Marcus Rodriguez's arrival 30 minutes later brought with him two companions whose presence immediately elevated the threat level beyond anything Jerry had previously experienced at his facility. The strangers carried themselves with military bearing that suggested combat experience, while their equipment included items that seemed inappropriate for recreational shooting but perfectly suited for more sinister applications. Their whispered conversations and careful observation of facility layout indicated planning that went far beyond normal customer activities. Jerry's recognition of the escalating danger was confirmed when he noticed Emma's subtle changes in behavior that indicated awareness of the new threat dynamic. Her shooting position shifted to provide optimal observation of the strangers while maintaining cover from potential hostile fire. Her equipment arrangement changed to prioritize rapid deployment over training convenience, while her apparent focus on target practice concealed constant surveillance of activities throughout the facility. The morning's tension escalated when Marcus approached Emma's shooting station with his companions, their body language indicating confrontational intentions that went beyond his usual harassment routine. His opening comments carried undertones of suspicion about her background that suggested either remarkable intuition or information obtained through channels that had nothing to do with casual observation of her shooting activities. "You know, Emma, we've been doing some research about your background," Marcus said with a confidence that indicated access to information sources beyond normal civilian resources. "Funny thing about insurance adjusters from Denver. Most of them don't have the kind of training you've been demonstrating here. Makes a person wonder what else you might be adjusting besides insurance claims." Emma's response maintained her established pattern of deflection and modesty, but subtle changes in her posture indicated readiness for immediate action if the confrontation escalated beyond verbal sparring. Her hand positioning, breathing pattern, and visual focus shifted to configurations that would allow rapid transition from apparent casualness to tactical response, preparations that went unnoticed by casual observers, but would be immediately recognizable to anyone with military or law enforcement training. The strangers positioned themselves to control Emma's movement options while maintaining their own escape routes, tactical considerations that indicated professional training, and hostile intentions that went far beyond curiosity about her shooting skills. Their equipment arrangement provided access to weapons and communications gear that suggested preparation for scenarios involving violence and coordination with external support elements. Jerry realized that the confrontation developing around Emma's shooting station represented the culmination of intelligence operations that had been building for months, with his facility serving as the focal point for activities that could determine whether domestic terrorism attacks were prevented or allowed to proceed. His role had become that of unwilling host to federal operations whose success or failure could affect national security and public safety in ways that extended far beyond his local business concerns. The situation reached critical intensity when Marcus's questions became specifically focused on Emma's military background and current employment, indicating access to information that civilian research couldn't provide. His knowledge of details about her past service and current assignment suggested either remarkable investigative capabilities or connections to sources with access to classified federal databases, possibilities that carried equally disturbing implications for operational security and Emma's personal safety. "We know you're not really Emma Chen," one of Marcus's companions stated with quiet menace that eliminated any pretense of casual conversation. "The question is whether you're going to cooperate with us voluntarily, or whether we need to arrange a more private discussion about your real employers and objectives." Emma's response was immediate and decisive, demonstrating capabilities that eliminated any remaining questions about her professional training and operational authority. Her movement from apparent vulnerability to tactical dominance occurred with fluid precision that caught her confronters completely unprepared for resistance from someone they had assumed to be isolated and defenseless. The transformation was remarkable and terrifying as Emma shifted from defensive posture to offensive action with speed that indicated extensive training in close-quarters combat and weapons employment. Her rifle, previously oriented toward distant targets, became a precision instrument for engaging immediate threats at ranges that required different skills entirely. Her first shot eliminated the primary threat with surgical accuracy that demonstrated marksmanship capabilities exceeding anything she had previously revealed during months of careful concealment. The chaos that erupted around Emma's shooting station involved multiple armed participants whose intentions and affiliations became clear only as the situation developed beyond any possibility of peaceful resolution. Federal agents emerged from concealed positions throughout the facility, coordinating responses to threats that had been anticipated but hoped to be avoided through less dramatic means. The careful planning that had gone into protecting Emma's cover operation proved inadequate for managing the escalation that occurred when her identity was finally compromised. Marcus Rodriguez's role in the confrontation revealed connections to extremist networks that extended far beyond local harassment campaigns, involving coordinated efforts to identify and eliminate federal law enforcement personnel conducting surveillance operations. His months of psychological pressure against Emma had been designed not just to force her withdrawal from the shooting community, but to test her responses and gather intelligence about federal interest in local activities. The gunfire that followed Emma's initial defensive shot involved multiple participants whose training and equipment indicated professional military backgrounds and access to weapon systems that exceeded typical civilian resources. The tactical complexity of the engagement required Emma to employ skills that went far beyond standard law enforcement training, demonstrating special operations capabilities that explained her selection for deep cover assignments involving high-risk domestic terrorism investigations. Jerry Hawkins found himself trapped in the middle of a firefight that transformed his peaceful shooting facility into a battlefield where federal agents engaged domestic terrorism suspects in combat that could determine the success or failure of operations extending far beyond local concerns. His facility had become the focal point for confrontations that involved national security considerations and public safety threats that he was only beginning to understand. The resolution of the immediate tactical situation required Emma to employ every aspect of her training and experience while coordinating with federal backup teams whose response had been planned for months, but never tested under actual combat conditions. Her ability to manage multiple threats while maintaining communication with support elements demonstrated operational capabilities that placed her among the most elite federal law enforcement personnel assigned to domestic terrorism investigations. The aftermath of the confrontation revealed the scope of the investigation that had been centered around Blackwood Ridge Shooting Complex, involving suspected domestic terrorism networks whose activities threatened government facilities and civilian targets throughout the region. Emma's months of careful intelligence gathering had identified key participants and documented activities that provided the evidence necessary for dismantling organized conspiracies before they could execute planned attacks. Marcus Rodriguez's arrest, along with his associates, represented the culmination of federal operations that had prevented domestic terrorism attacks while exposing networks of extremist organizations operating within seemingly normal community activities. The investigation's success vindicated the decision to place Emma in deep cover despite the personal costs and operational risks that her assignment had required. The revelation of Emma's true identity as Special Agent Emma Chen, assigned to the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Task Force, explained every aspect of her behavior that had seemed inconsistent with her claimed civilian background. Her advanced marksmanship skills, tactical knowledge, and operational security measures had been necessary components of assignments that placed her in constant danger while requiring her to maintain authentic civilian cover that could withstand scrutiny from sophisticated adversaries. Jerry Hawkins emerged from the experience with profound respect for federal law enforcement personnel whose sacrifices and dedication protected communities from threats that most civilians never realized existed. His shooting range had served as the stage for operations that prevented domestic terrorism attacks while exposing networks of extremist organizations whose activities threatened public safety and national security. The quiet insurance adjuster who had endured months of harassment while maintaining her professional objectives had demonstrated courage and competence that exemplified the best traditions of federal law enforcement service. Her willingness to accept personal risk while protecting her mission and the safety of innocent civilians represented the kind of dedication that kept communities safe from threats they never knew existed. The morning that had begun with routine shooting practice had concluded with the prevention of domestic terrorism attacks and the arrest of suspects whose activities threatened government facilities and civilian targets throughout the region. Emma's patient endurance of harassment and systematic intelligence gathering had provided the foundation for operations that protected countless innocent people from violence they would never know had been planned against them. The smoke from the initial exchange of gunfire had barely cleared when Emma realized the true scope of the threat facing everyone at Blackwood Ridge. Through her tactical earpiece, Agent Torres's voice carried desperate urgency that chilled Emma to her core despite years of training for worst-case scenarios. "Emma, we have a problem. Intelligence just came in about a secondary team positioned on the ridge overlooking the facility. They're armed with explosives and have clear fields of fire on all exits. This wasn't just about exposing you. They're planning to eliminate everyone who witnessed today's operation." Emma's blood ran cold as the implications became clear. The domestic terrorism cell hadn't just planned to compromise her cover or eliminate a federal agent. They had orchestrated a massacre designed to eliminate witnesses, while sending a message about the consequences of federal interference in their operations. Every innocent person at the range had become a target in a coordinated attack that went far beyond anything the FBI had anticipated. The tactical situation was nightmare fuel for any law enforcement professional. Emma found herself positioned in the center of a shooting facility with limited cover, surrounded by civilians who had no training for combat situations, facing an unknown number of hostiles with superior positioning and heavy weapons. The federal backup teams were engaged with the immediate threats inside the facility, leaving her as the primary defense against snipers who could pick off evacuating civilians at will. Jerry Hawkins crouched behind the range counter, his face pale with the realization that his business had become a killing ground where domestic terrorists planned to execute everyone present as part of their twisted message about federal overreach. The customers who had come for peaceful recreation found themselves trapped in a scenario that resembled a military assault more than anything they could have imagined when they arrived for their morning shooting session. Emma's mind raced through tactical options as she assessed the defensive capabilities of the range building against sniper fire from elevated positions. The facility's construction provided minimal protection against high-powered rifles fired from the surrounding hills, while the open shooting bays offered excellent fields of fire for anyone positioned to exploit them. Traditional law enforcement responses would result in massive civilian casualties before backup could neutralize the external threats. The communication intercepts that Agent Torres relayed painted an even grimmer picture of the coordinated attack that was about to unfold. The external team possessed military-grade equipment, including armor-piercing ammunition, explosive devices, and communications gear that allowed them to coordinate with surviving members of the internal assault team. Their plan called for systematic elimination of everyone at the facility, starting with law enforcement personnel and proceeding through civilian witnesses, according to predetermined target priorities. Emma's years of special operations training had prepared her for scenarios involving hostage rescue and terrorist threats, but never from the perspective of being trapped inside the target area with responsibility for protecting untrained civilians against professionally equipped adversaries. Her standard tactical playbook assumed support from specialized teams with appropriate equipment, not solo operations using sporting rifles against military-trained opponents with superior weapons. And positioning. The first sniper shots shattered the morning air, with distinctive cracks that announced high-velocity impacts against the range building's metal siding. The precision of the placement indicated skilled marksmen who were systematically targeting potential escape routes while avoiding areas where return fire might be effective. Their discipline and coordination suggested military backgrounds and extensive planning for this specific operation. Emma realized that conventional defensive strategies would fail catastrophically against opponents who possessed superior firepower, positioning, and numbers. Her only advantage lay in intimate knowledge of the range facility, combined with marksmanship skills that exceeded anything the terrorists had encountered in their operational planning. The question was whether those advantages could be leveraged effectively enough to neutralize threats before civilian casualties mounted beyond acceptable levels. The radio chatter from the external sniper team, intercepted by federal surveillance equipment, revealed their confidence about controlling the tactical situation through overwhelming firepower and superior positioning. Their communications discussed civilian targets with casual indifference that demonstrated complete commitment to maximizing casualties as part of their political message. The planned massacre would serve multiple purposes, eliminating witnesses, while demonstrating the vulnerability of federal operations and the cost of interfering with their activities. Emma's decision to attempt an impossible shot came from the desperate recognition that conventional tactics offered no hope of preventing the slaughter that was about to unfold. The external snipers had positioned themselves approximately 800 yards from the range facility, distances that challenged even expert marksmen under ideal conditions. Attempting precision shots at such ranges with a sporting rifle under combat stress against moving targets seemed like suicide, but represented the only alternative to watching innocent people die while waiting for backup that might arrive too late. Her preparation for the critical shot required abandoning every principle of tactical caution that had kept her alive through years of dangerous operations. She had to expose herself to return fire while maintaining the steady positioning necessary for extreme-range precision shooting. The sporting rifle that had served adequately for her cover identity would now be tested beyond its design parameters, requiring her to compensate for equipment limitations through skill and determination that exceeded normal human capabilities. The mathematics of the shot involved calculations that pushed the boundaries of ballistic science under field conditions. Wind speed and direction, air density, temperature variations, and target movement all affected bullet trajectory at ranges where small errors resulted in complete misses. Emma's training had included such scenarios, but always with specialized equipment designed for extreme range, precision rather than the modified hunting rifle that represented her only option for engaging distant threats. Jerry Hawkins watched in amazement as Emma transformed her modest shooting station into a precision firing position that would have impressed military snipers. Her movements displayed efficiency born from countless hours of training under stress, while her focus eliminated everything except the technical requirements of achieving hits at distances that challenged the fundamental capabilities of her equipment. The quiet insurance adjuster had become a weapon system optimized for engaging threats that conventional law enforcement couldn't reach. The first shot Emma fired at the distant sniper position traveled through air that shimmered with heat distortion, following a trajectory that required her to aim several feet above and to the side of her intended target. The sound of impact, delayed by distance and obscured by environmental noise, provided no immediate confirmation of results. forcing her to rely on spotting scope observations to assess effectiveness while preparing for follow-up shots under conditions that grew more dangerous with each passing second. The reaction from the sniper team indicated that Emma's shot had achieved its intended effect, disrupting their careful positioning and forcing them to reconsider their assumptions about the defensive capabilities of their targets. Their communications revealed surprise and concern about facing precision return fire from distances they had assumed were safe from sporting rifles operated by civilian shooters. The psychological impact of being engaged effectively had altered their tactical confidence and operational tempo. Emma's second shot took advantage of the confusion created by her initial success, targeting a sniper who had exposed himself while attempting to relocate to a position that offered better protection from her return fire. The shot required her to lead a moving target at extreme range while compensating for environmental factors that changed with each passing minute. Her ability to achieve hits under such conditions demonstrated marksmanship capabilities that few people in the world possessed. The systematic elimination of the external sniper team required Emma to employ every aspect of her training while pushing her equipment beyond reasonable expectations for accuracy and reliability. Each shot demanded perfect execution of fundamentals that became increasingly difficult to maintain as stress accumulated and her position drew more concentrated return fire. Her sporting rifle, never designed for sustained precision shooting under combat conditions, began showing signs of mechanical stress that threatened its continued accuracy. Agent Torres's voice in Emma's earpiece provided critical intelligence about the remaining threats while coordinating the response of federal backup teams that were fighting their way through the facility to reach positions where they could provide effective support. The complexity of the tactical situation required simultaneous engagement of multiple threat vectors while protecting civilians who remained trapped in vulnerable positions throughout the facility. The breakthrough that changed the tactical dynamic came when Emma's systematic elimination of external snipers allowed federal teams to begin evacuating civilians through routes that had previously been covered by hostile fire. Her ability to neutralize threats at ranges beyond the capability of standard law enforcement equipment had created the tactical space necessary for rescue operations to proceed without massive casualties. The final sniper proved to be the most challenging target. Having learned from observing the fate of his teammates and adapted his tactics to minimize exposure while maintaining effective fire on evacuation routes, his position offered excellent protection from return fire while providing clear fields of fire on anyone attempting to leave the facility. Emma realized that neutralizing this threat would require a shot that exceeded anything she had previously attempted under combat conditions. The technical requirements for the final shot pushed the boundaries of what was possible with sporting equipment under field conditions. The target's position required Emma to engage through a gap in terrain features that provided only seconds of opportunity when the sniper exposed himself for his own shots. The timing, precision, and equipment performance required for success represented the convergence of skill, preparation, and determination that defined the difference between exceptional and impossible. Emma's preparation for the decisive shot required her to abandon the covered position that had protected her during the engagement, moving to an exposed location that offered the angle necessary to reach the final sniper's position. The movement exposed her to return fire while requiring her to establish a stable shooting platform under conditions that challenged every aspect of her marksmanship training. The shot that ended the external threat traveled through air that carried the hopes and fears of everyone trapped in the facility, following a trajectory calculated through years of training and experience that culminated in this moment of supreme technical challenge. The bullet's flight time allowed Emma to observe its path through her scope, watching as physics and skill combined to achieve what conventional wisdom would have deemed impossible. The silence that followed the final shot carried profound implications for everyone who had survived the coordinated attack on Blackwood Ridge Shooting Complex. The elimination of external threats allowed federal teams to complete evacuation operations while securing evidence that would support prosecutions, extending far beyond the immediate participants. Emma's impossible shooting performance had prevented a massacre while protecting the integrity of operations that extended throughout the domestic terrorism investigation. Jerry Hawkins emerged from the experience with profound respect for the federal agents, whose dedication and skill had prevented tragedy while exposing threats that most civilians never realized existed. His facility had served as the stage for operations that demonstrated both the reality of domestic terrorism threats and the capabilities of law enforcement personnel trained to counter such dangers. The aftermath of the engagement revealed the scope of the conspiracy that had threatened not just the people at Blackwood Ridge, but government facilities and civilian targets throughout the region. Emma's months of patient intelligence gathering, combined with her extraordinary performance under the ultimate tactical pressure, had dismantled a domestic terrorism network while preventing attacks that could have claimed hundreds of innocent lives. Agent Torres's debriefing acknowledged that Emma's shooting performance had exceeded anything anticipated in operational planning, achieving results that specialized military units would have found challenging with optimal equipment and conditions. Her ability to neutralize multiple threats at extreme ranges using civilian sporting equipment represented marksmanship excellence that would become legendary within federal law enforcement circles. The transformation of Emma's public identity, from harassed amateur to decorated federal agent, created profound changes in how the shooting sports community understood the capabilities and dedication of law enforcement personnel. Her willingness to endure months of abuse while maintaining her mission demonstrated courage that extended far beyond tactical competence, encompassing the moral strength necessary to protect others regardless of personal cost. The range that had been known for recreational shooting and friendly competition would now be remembered as the site where one federal agent's impossible shooting performance prevented domestic terrorism attacks while exposing the dedication and capabilities of law enforcement personnel who operated in shadows to protect communities from threats they never knew existed. Emma's legacy at Blackwood Ridge would inspire future generations of shooters while honoring the memory of a day when precision marksmanship served the highest purposes of protecting innocent lives and defending democratic institutions. The final image that would remain in Jerry's memory was Emma's silhouette against the morning sky as she completed the shots that saved everyone present, demonstrating that sometimes the most important battles were fought by individuals whose quiet competence exceeded every expectation and whose dedication to protecting others transformed impossible challenges into defining moments of courage and skill. The woman who had appeared to be just zeroing rifles had proven capable of shots that changed everything for everyone fortunate enough to witness her extraordinary performance under the ultimate pressure. The ambulances and crime scene vehicles had departed hours ago, leaving Blackwood Ridge Shooting Complex eerily quiet under the fading afternoon light. Emma sat alone on the range office steps, her modified hunting rifle resting against the wooden railing where she had carefully placed it after federal technicians finished documenting the weapon that had changed everything. The silence felt strange after months of morning routines filled with the steady rhythm of precision shooting and the underlying tension of her undercover assignment. Agent Torres approached carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee from the machine in Jerry's office, her professional demeanor softened by exhaustion and the kind of relief that followed operations where everything could have gone catastrophically wrong, but somehow ended with minimal casualties. She settled beside Emma without speaking, understanding that some experiences required processing time before they could be translated into the formal reports and debriefings that would follow. The ballistics team is calling it the most remarkable shooting performance they've documented in 20 years of federal service, Torres said quietly, her voice carrying genuine admiration mixed with professional assessment. 800-yard shots with a sporting rifle under combat. Stress isn't something they see outside of very specialized military units. The fact that you achieved multiple hits while protecting civilians makes it even more exceptional. Emma accepted the coffee gratefully, using the warmth to steady hands that had finally begun to show the tremors that adrenaline suppressed during the critical moments of the engagement. Her body was processing the accumulated stress of months spent maintaining deep cover while building toward a confrontation that had exceeded every worst-case scenario in their operational planning. The successful outcome felt surreal after so many hours of believing that failure was inevitable. I kept thinking about all those mornings when Marcus would watch me adjust my scope, Emma reflected, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent months hiding her true capabilities behind a facade of amateur uncertainty. He was so convinced that I was pretending to know more than I did. Turns out he was right, just not in the way he imagined. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that Marcus Rodriguez's harassment campaign had actually provided perfect cover for Emma's mission preparation, allowing her to practice advanced techniques while maintaining the appearance of gradual improvement that supported her civilian identity. His contempt for her apparent amateur status had blinded him to the systematic training regimen that prepared her for scenarios that recreational shooters never contemplated. Jerry Hawkins emerged from his office carrying a folder thick with federal paperwork that would document the transformation of his shooting facility from peaceful recreation center to crime scene in a single morning. His expression reflected the complex emotions of someone who had discovered that months of customer conflicts and harassment incidents were actually components of domestic terrorism operations targeting his business and threatening his community. The federal investigators want to keep the range closed for another week while they complete evidence collection and threat assessment, Jerry explained, his voice showing the strain of processing events that had revealed hidden dangers and activities. He thought he understood completely. After that, we can reopen, but things are going to be different. The FBI wants to establish a permanent liaison relationship because of what happened here. Emma nodded, understanding that her presence at Blackwood Ridge had created lasting changes that extended far beyond the immediate investigation. The facility would now serve as a case study for federal training programs, while maintaining enhanced security measures designed to identify potential threats before they could develop into operational dangers. The shooting sports community would benefit from these improvements, but at the cost of innocence about the potential for ordinary activities to attract extremist attention. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Deputy Director Michael Harrison from the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Division, whose presence indicated the national significance of the operation that had concluded at Blackwood Ridge. His reputation preceded him as someone who had spent decades pursuing domestic extremist groups while developing countermeasures that protected American communities from ideologically motivated violence. Agent Chen, your performance today prevented what our analysts believe would have been the deadliest domestic terrorism attack in Colorado history, Harrison said with the formal gravity that such announcements required. The intelligence you gathered during your undercover assignment, combined with your tactical response to the immediate threat, has dismantled a network that was planning coordinated attacks against federal facilities throughout the region. The scope of the conspiracy that Emma had helped expose was still being revealed through analysis of seized communications equipment and documents recovered from the suspects. The domestic terrorism cell had developed plans for simultaneous attacks designed to maximize casualties while demonstrating their capability to strike federal targets with devastating effectiveness. The coordination required for such operations indicated connections to national extremist networks with resources and training that posed ongoing threats to public safety. Emma's months of patient intelligence gathering had provided the foundation for understanding how seemingly disconnected individuals and groups coordinated their activities through channels that appeared Innocent to casual observation, her documentation of conversations, behavioral patterns, and equipment choices had revealed communication methods and operational protocols that would inform federal counterterrorism efforts for years to come. "The President has been briefed on your actions," Harrison continued, his words carrying implications that would transform Emma's career trajectory in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. "There will be commendations and recognition, but more importantly, there will be opportunities to apply your unique combination of skills and experience to challenges that few agents could handle." The prospect of continued specialized assignments brought mixed emotions for Emma, who had discovered during her undercover work that she possessed capabilities for sustained, deep cover operations that exceeded anything revealed by her previous service record. The psychological demands of maintaining false identity while gathering intelligence under hostile conditions had tested every aspect of her training while revealing strengths that could be valuable in future operations. Torres explained that the domestic terrorism network they had disrupted represented one component of a larger investigation into extremist activities that spanned multiple states and involved coordination with international terrorist organizations. Emma's successful penetration of local recruitment efforts had provided insights into tactics and vulnerabilities that would inform federal strategies for preventing future attacks while protecting agents assigned to similar high-risk infiltration missions. The personal cost of her success was beginning to manifest as Emma processed the realization that her life at Blackwood Ridge had been built on deceptions that made genuine relationships impossible. The shooting sports community that had provided cover for her mission would remember her as someone who had hidden her true identity while documenting their activities for federal surveillance. The isolation that had protected her operationally would continue affecting her personally long after the mission concluded. Jerry's reaction to learning Emma's true identity reflected the complex emotions that civilians experienced when they discovered the extent to which federal law enforcement operations intersected with their daily lives. His shooting range had been selected as an infiltration target precisely because it provided authentic cover for developing the relationships and observational opportunities that successful intelligence gathering required. "I keep thinking about all those conversations where you deflected questions about your background," Jerry said with a mixture of admiration and unease. "You were protecting all of us from knowing things that could have put us in danger, but it still feels strange to realize how much was happening that we never suspected." Emma understood his conflicted feelings about discovering that federal agents had been operating within his community while maintaining false identities that made authentic relationships impossible. The success of undercover operations depended on such deceptions, but the personal costs extended beyond the agents themselves to include the innocent people whose trust was necessarily betrayed for operational security. The debriefing process would continue for weeks as federal analysts processed the intelligence Emma had gathered while developing strategies for pursuing the broader extremist network that her investigation had revealed. Her unique perspective as both an infiltration specialist and tactical response expert would inform training programs designed to prepare other agents for similar high-risk assignments. Harrison's offer of promotion to the FBI's elite counterterrorism unit represented recognition of capabilities that few agents possessed, but also carried implications for future assignments that would involve similar personal sacrifices and professional isolation. Emma's ability to maintain cover while gathering critical intelligence under hostile conditions made her valuable for operations that required exceptional psychological resilience and operational discipline. The transformation of her public identity from harassment victim to decorated federal agent would create challenges for any future undercover assignments, but also provided opportunities to contribute to training programs that prepared other agents for the psychological demands of deep cover operations. Her experience at Blackwood Ridge would become a case study for managing The emotional costs of sustained deception while maintaining operational effectiveness. Torres's assessment of the investigation's success emphasized both the immediate victories of preventing planned attacks and dismantling active terrorist cells, and the longer-term benefits of intelligence gathered about extremist recruitment methods and operational protocols. Emma's patient documentation of seemingly innocent activities had revealed how domestic terrorism networks exploited civilian communities for cover while developing capabilities for mass casualty attacks. The shooting sports community would benefit from enhanced security measures and threat awareness training that emerged from analyzing the methods used by extremists to identify potential recruits and gather intelligence about law enforcement activities. The lessons learned at Blackwood Ridge would inform federal efforts to protect similar facilities while maintaining the open access that made them valuable for legitimate recreational and competitive activities. Emma's decision about accepting the promotion would determine whether her extraordinary performance under ultimate pressure became the foundation for a specialized career protecting Americans from domestic terrorism threats, or whether the personal costs of undercover work had reached levels that required different approaches to public service. The choice reflected broader questions about how individual agents balanced professional effectiveness with personal well-being in assignments that demanded exceptional sacrifices. The setting sun cast long shadows across the empty shooting lanes, where Emma had spent months developing the skills and cover identity that ultimately saved lives while exposing threats that most Americans would never know existed. Her legacy at Blackwood Ridge would inspire future agents while honoring the dedication required to protect communities from enemies who exploited the freedoms they sought to destroy. The quiet that had once provided peace during her morning shooting sessions would now carry different meanings, representing both the successful conclusion of a dangerous mission and the beginning of new challenges that would test every lesson learned during her time as the insurance adjuster who was really one of America's most dedicated protectors. The woman who had appeared to be just zeroing rifles had proven herself capable of shots that changed everything, demonstrating that sometimes the most important battles were fought by individuals whose quiet competence exceeded every expectation while serving purposes greater than themselves. 6 months later, Emma stood before a graduating class of FBI recruits at Quantico, her once secret rifle now displayed in a place of honor behind the podium. The weapon that had appeared so modest among the expensive equipment at Blackwood Ridge now represented something far more significant to the young agents preparing for careers that might demand similar impossible performances under ultimate pressure. Excellence isn't about having the most expensive equipment or the loudest voice in the room, Emma began, her words carrying the authority of someone who had proven these principles under circumstances that tested every aspect of her character and training. It's about consistent preparation, quiet confidence, and the willingness to act when others cannot. The faces looking back at her reflected the same mixture of determination and uncertainty that Emma remembered from her own early training, before she understood how unpredictable the challenges of federal service could become. These new agents would face threats that couldn't be anticipated in classroom scenarios, requiring them to adapt skills and principles to situations that exceeded their training parameters. Her assignment as chief instructor for advanced tactical operations represented the FBI's recognition that her unique combination of deep cover experience and tactical excellence provided valuable perspectives for preparing agents to handle complex domestic terrorism threats. The curriculum she had developed emphasized psychological resilience alongside technical proficiency, understanding that both elements were essential for success in high-stakes operations. The memorial wall beside her displayed photographs of the 8 civilians and 3 federal agents whose lives had been saved by her actions at Blackwood Ridge, serving as a daily reminder of why precision and preparation mattered in contexts where failure meant innocent people died. Each face represented someone who returned home safely, because one agent refused to accept that certain shots were impossible. Emma's teaching methodology emphasized fundamentals over technology, demonstrating how basic principles could achieve extraordinary results when applied with sufficient skill and determination. Her students learned to maximize the potential of standard equipment rather than depending on specialized gear that might not be available when circumstances demanded immediate action with whatever resources were at hand. The transformation from harassment victim to respected instructor had required Emma to process complex emotions about deception, identity, and the personal costs of serving purposes greater than individual comfort. Her experience maintaining cover while enduring systematic abuse had taught lessons about resilience that couldn't be learned from textbooks or training exercises. Her former shooting station at Blackwood Ridge had been converted into a memorial garden where Jerry Hawkins honored both the victims of domestic terrorism and the agents who protected communities from such threats. The small placard beside Emma's favorite bench simply read, "Dedicated to those who serve in silence," acknowledging the countless federal personnel whose sacrifices went unrecognized because operational security demanded anonymity. The domestic terrorism network that Emma's investigation had exposed continued, providing intelligence value months after the initial arrests, as federal analysts traced connections that revealed the scope of extremist coordination across multiple states. Her patient documentation of seemingly innocent activities had created a roadmap for understanding how such groups operated within normal communities while planning devastating attacks. Marcus Rodriguez's trial had become a focal point for national discussions about domestic terrorism threats and the importance of community vigilance in identifying suspicious activities. His transformation from local harassment problem to convicted terrorist demonstrated how ordinary social conflicts could mask more sinister motivations and connections to dangerous extremist networks. The shooting sports community had embraced enhanced security measures and threat awareness training that emerged from analyzing the methods used by extremists to exploit civilian facilities for operational cover. Emma's story had become an inspiration for responsible gun owners who understood that their skills and dedication could serve larger purposes than personal recreation or competition. Jerry Hawkins frequently spoke at federal training sessions about recognizing signs of potential terrorist recruitment within civilian communities, sharing insights gained from his unwitting role in Emma's undercover operation. His experience demonstrated how ordinary business owners could contribute to national security efforts through awareness and cooperation with federal law enforcement personnel. The lessons learned at Blackwood Ridge informed FBI strategies for protecting similar facilities while maintaining the accessibility that made them valuable for legitimate purposes. Emma's successful penetration of extremist recruitment efforts had revealed vulnerabilities that required attention without destroying the open communities that made American freedoms possible. Her relationship with the shooting sports community remained complex, as her true identity created ongoing questions about trust and authenticity that affected how civilian shooters interacted with federal personnel. The success of her mission had required deceptions that made some community members uncomfortable, even though they understood the necessity of such methods for protecting public safety. The presidential commendation that Emma received acknowledged not just her tactical performance, but her sustained courage in maintaining cover while gathering intelligence that prevented mass casualty attacks. The private ceremony emphasized that the highest forms of patriotic service often required personal sacrifices that went unrecognized by the communities being protected. Emma's students learned that heroism frequently looked like quiet competence rather than dramatic gestures, understanding that the most important battles were often fought by individuals whose preparation and dedication enabled them to act decisively when crisis moments demanded impossible performances. The woman who had endured harassment while maintaining her mission exemplified how strength often worked through patience rather than confrontation. The memorial service for the planned attack victims who were never created because Emma's shots prevented the massacre served as a reminder that successful counter-terrorism operations were measured by tragedies that didn't occur rather than headlines that were never written. The empty spaces where casualties would have been honored the invisible nature of prevention-focused law enforcement work. Her evening routine now included visits to the Quantico shooting range, where she continued practicing the precision shooting that had saved lives while serving as a bridge between her past identity and current responsibilities. The familiar rhythm of careful sight alignment and controlled breathing provided continuity between the agent, who had posed as an amateur, and the instructor who taught advanced tactical skills. The quiet satisfaction Emma found in developing the next generation of federal agents represented a different form of service than her undercover work, but one that honored the same principles of dedication to protecting innocent people from threats they might never know existed. Her influence would multiply through the agents she trained, extending her impact far beyond any individual operation. As she concluded her lecture and watched the recruits file out to their next training session, Emma reflected on the journey that had transformed her from a harassment victim maintaining elaborate deceptions to an instructor whose story inspired others to pursue excellence in service of larger purposes. The shots that had seemed impossible on that decisive morning at Blackwood Ridge had opened pathways to contributions she was still discovering. The woman who had appeared to be just zeroing rifles had proven that preparation, persistence, and purpose could achieve extraordinary results when circumstances demanded nothing less than perfection. Her legacy would continue inspiring agents who understood that serving others sometimes required accepting personal costs that the protected would never know about, and that the highest forms of courage often looked like quiet competence rather than dramatic gestures. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.